Hi everyone, I'm Jo Taylor, founder of METUPUK UK, and today we thought we'd do a little piece on drug access and the issues with approvals for drugs. So I want to introduce you to Madeleine Meynell. If you want to tell people what you actually do in your volunteer role for METUPUK UK, because what you've got to remember is that we're all volunteers. None of us are paid to do this, and we take our time and effort in our own time to actually work for METUPUK UK. So, Madeleine, if you want to tell people what you do.
Hi everyone, I'm Madeleine Meynell. I'm one of the trustees of METUPUK UK, and like Jo said, we're all volunteers. And one of the really important things that METUPUK UK does is it tries to get the best access for drugs to cancer drugs for people living in the UK. So part of my role is to coordinate the drugs approvals with the different approval bodies that we have. We have quite a team working on it. It's not just me. There's a few of us, and we couldn't do it without all of the wonderful volunteers that work for METUPUK UK.
Yeah. And Madeleine, we do the approvals for not just NICE, which is the National Institute for Healthcare and Excellence in England, which drugs get approved on there. We also do approvals for the SMC, which is the Scottish Medicines Consortium as well. So it's both approvals, and hopefully that patients get equitable access to these drugs. So I've got the first question I'm going to ask is, how do new drugs get considered for approval in England and the rest of the UK?
Okay, so it's a two-tier process. The first thing that the drugs bodies need to know is this drug safe for people to take? And that is coordinated by the MHRA, which stands for the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. All of these organisations have got horrible acronyms about their names, but yeah, so we usually just call it the MHRA. They look at the safety profile of drugs to see if they're safe to be used in the UK outside of clinical trials. They don't take into account the cost of the drugs. It's just simply a safety thing, and it's a really important job that they do. Then moving on to whether the drug is cost effective, that's assessed by NICE, as Jo has just said, in England, and the SMC in Scotland. And moving out to the devolved nations, they tend to use NICE guidance, although there's often a few weeks lag after decisions are made, so that can add extra delays to people living in Wales and Northern Ireland. Both NICE and the SMC, they work in a really similar way. They gather evidence from pharma, from clinical experts, from patient experts on the drug, on how effective it is and how much it costs. And then a panel of independent experts assesses the evidence to see how it fits into the healthcare system. Usually NICE and the SMC, they come to the same conclusions on drugs. Occasionally we have some differences, and we have some drugs that might be available in Scotland and not in England, or vice versa.
And there's one currently, isn't there, called PCRE?
There's one called PCRE at the moment, which is available in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but not in Scotland. These postcode lotteries, they are quite divisive, unpleasant. The NICE and the SMC, they were devised actually to stop the postcode lotteries, and they kind of do within the nations that they serve, but not between the nations. It's a fair price for the drugs.
But yeah, it's a frustrating process sometimes, but it's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really important process. We can't just have a situation where a drug company would dictate the price and the healthcare system would have to pay. There does need to be a bit of give and take. We know that developing drugs, it's expensive, and so obviously pharma companies, they do need to recoup a profit in order to develop the next drug down the line, but they also sometimes need to have their coattails held back a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So how does METUPUK work with the NICE and the SMC?
Okay, so METUPUK, we work in a number of ways. So before these committees discuss whether or not a drug should be used in the health service, there's a lot of background work, a lot of paperwork, a lot of sifting of evidence that we do. So, for example, for NICE, there are lots of ways that patient groups can get involved in. They get involved in the scoping, which means the areas of focus for the drug appraisal, which comparator drugs are they going to look at, quite technical things. And then evidence submission. So we collect evidence from our networks and we submit it to NICE and the SMC. Patient quotes, really powerful. So we do quite often put patient quotes within our submissions. And then we also send patient experts to the actual committees. And our patient experts, they're wonderful, like amazing volunteers, and we're incredibly grateful for all that they do. Because they go in front of these committees. They can be quite daunting, but they can explain what it's like to live with metastatic breast cancer. And no one else in the room knows that. NICE will have up to 2 committees. Committee 1 is usually an initial sort of look at the evidence. And if the results from committee 1 are a little bit uncertain, it can go to committee 2. So committee 1, a patient expert is always invited, and in committee 2, they're sometimes invited. But both of them are held in public, and anyone can log on to the NICE website and listen in. They're quite long, but they're worth listening into if anyone's interested. And they are free for anyone to listen into.
And if there's appeal, what happens there?
So it does an appeal. Like if at the second committee meeting a drug is still turned down, then usually the appeal will be done by the pharmaceutical company involved. And occasionally patient groups can also lodge an appeal.
What are the areas that NICE have actually based their draft decision on?
Okay, so in HER2-Low, where we are with that is we've had the first committee meeting, and at the end of that, NICE were actually quite positive about the drug, but there were areas of uncertainty. And I think probably the main sticking point is the financials. But if you look at the NICE, the press release that they put out on their website about this decision, it was really positive. It said NICE draft guidance recognises the potential of a new targeted drug for a type of advanced breast cancer. So they really were giving out signals that they do see the potential of this drug. There's just a few sticking points. They agreed that Enhertu increases how long people live. And they agreed that breast cancer has a profound effect on people's quality of life.
Oh, absolutely,
And they certainly agreed that there was an unmet need for a targeted treatment for HER2-low breast cancer. Because let's not forget, Enhertu is the only drug that has so far been shown effective in people with HER2-low breast cancer. So they did agree on all these things.
What were they actually what was the uncertainties of the committee, and what did they want resolving?
So the uncertainties were quite sort of technical things. There were uncertainties about in a clinical trial, you have the drug that they're testing, and then you have a control arm for the physician's choice, where they use different comparator drugs. So there were some questions about some of the drugs in the physician's choice arm, whether or not it was appropriate to the way that cancer patients are treated in the NHS. They questioned some issues around the trial data, around how long. Actually, the main questions were not about the actual data, but they were about the models. So the projections about how long people will live when they come off the drug. And there was questions about the quality of life data that the company had submitted. So quite technical questions, and actually in many cases not actually on the data but on the modelled data.
So what does this draft decision actually mean for patients at the moment with Enhertu-Low?
So obviously the first thing to remember is that if you've got HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer, Enhertu is still a drug that the NHS will be providing for you. This is only applying to HER2-low. So I've seen a little bit of confusion. Some people talking about whether or not they would get this drug if they had HER2 positive. So if you're in that category, don't worry. But HER2-low is actually a really quite large category of patients. It's a combination of people who currently would be calling themselves triple negative, combined with people who would be calling themselves HER2 negative but estrogen or hormone receptor positive. And there are more patients who would be eligible for HER2-low treatment than for HER2 positive treatment. So the drug company has estimated that in England, 1,000 patients would be eligible for Enhertu for HER2-low. So what this draft decision means for patients is that at the moment, this 1,000 patients in England, and obviously more in the rest of the country, have now not been given access to Enhertu after this first committee meeting. So as a lot of people know, there is a NICE consultation open for Enhertu-Low, and there are on the website, there are some documents, and I'm going to apologise. They're very technical. They're not nice to read.
It's not for you to apologise.
They are, but there is a shorter version called the draft guidance, which is about 20 pages long. Some of it most people will understand, but most of it most people won't understand, and I don't understand it all either. It's very difficult. I think you probably would need a degree in health economics for a lot of it. But don't be deterred.
Don't be deterred to do this.
No, don't be deterred, because it is open for the public to respond to, and the questions that they ask are actually, some of them are quite you can just put them into your own words, and write from your heart, from your experience, what it means to live with metastatic breast cancer, how it affects you, how it affects your family, how it affects your friends, and what it would mean to have a new treatment line, how much that would mean to have even a few extra months or ideally years. These are what we are living with. This is the reality of living with metastatic breast cancer. And it's important to squeeze every bit of life that we can out of these drugs.
Absolutely. So do you think people should lobby or speak to their MPs about anything?
Well, obviously it's up to people. They have to make their own decision about that. But I would say to people, remember, this is draft guidance. It's not final guidance. This is only after committee 1. Committee 2 has not happened yet. You can, if you want to, lobby your MP, but MPs do tend to keep their hands off at this stage, because NICE is not actually part of the government. It's a separate organisation.
Absolutely separate.
They don't want to be seen to be interfering in the work. And obviously it's very technical work, and the MPs probably they're generalists, so they're not going to understand every single minutiae. And obviously there's a lot of people with a lot of different diseases all lobbying their MPs, not just breast cancer.
But they really need to wait, don't they, until the results come back from the second committee meeting.
This is what I will be doing, Jo. So I will be waiting until the results come back from the second committee meeting. But obviously everyone makes their own decisions. But I personally, my MP is great, but I'm not sure how much he could do at this stage.
Yeah. So, and then what happens if the decision doesn't change? What would happen then?
So if the decision doesn't change, we would
And
expect
Enhertu-Low isn't approved.
we
Yeah.
would expect Daiichi Sankyo and AstraZeneca to appeal the decision
Yeah.
because it is a really important drug. It's a pivotal drug, I think.
Yeah.
So I think they will appeal it hard. The other thing to remember, of course, is that the SMC, they haven't met yet about this, but they are
Yeah.
meeting about this.
Yeah.
And so their decision for Enhertu-Low will be coming out probably near the end of the year. And if SMC and NICE come to different decisions on this very important drug, we do think this will increase the patient or the public awareness actually about the issues for inequality in access to cancer drugs
Absolutely.
for
I
all
think
cancer patients.
it will show and it will shine a light massively on the inequalities that there are there, and it should do as well.
Yes,
But
yeah, it should do.
yeah, I guess what we'd hope really though, and at the end, is that, you know, the different breast cancer charities should come together, amplify each other's voices, and we'll need the drug companies and the SMC, and NICE and the SMC to work really hard to actually bring these drugs, or this drug in specifically, to patients at the time.
Yes, absolutely, Jay. Completely
So
agree
that's
with you.
fantastic. So, Madeleine, that has been a really good session. I think you've given people, you know, probably a lot of information there, a lot of things to think about, and hopefully people will go off now and write the little note to NICE to actually say that we need this drug. You know, you've got to log on to the system. Please write your piece of consultation, you know, from your heart. And hopefully, you know, the more voices that are heard, the better.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe.
So thanks a lot, Madeleine.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. But so simplistically, on the financial side of drug approvals, what's the difference? And I know that there are two specific differences between the old model and the new model.
Okay, so the way that this is quite complicated, so I'm going to try not to
Yeah,
get
let's
Joe.
I think let's let's keep it simplistic for people so that they understand
Yes.
the system that they used to use, and now the new model that has disadvantages.
So essentially, the way that NICE assesses drugs has changed, and it changed about 18 months ago. So under the old model, they used to have something called the end of life criteria. So that sounds quite scary, but what it actually was if in trials, if a particular drug, a particular disease had less than 2 years median survival, and a new drug could offer 3 months or more, NICE would pay a higher premium. So they
Yeah.
would pay more for drugs than they would do for other drugs.
So there was an increased willingness to pay for drugs at the end of life, wasn't there?
There was, yes, thank
But
you.
in the new model, what does that now? What happens now?
So in the new model, NICE actually had a really good idea. Their idea was that they should pay more for a wider range of drugs, which in theory is a great idea. And
Yeah.
they used two different measures to work out willingness to pay. Absolute shortfall in life and proportional shortfall in life, which is quite technical, but this is what they were doing. The problem was they didn't offer any more money. So they actually took some money from the end of life drugs in order to pay for a wider range of drugs. So whilst we don't object to a wider range of drugs being funded, of course we don't, we would have preferred that there'd be more funding rather than taking it from the end of life.
So in effect, what it does, that the disadvantage is for most metastatic breast cancer drugs, they were looking at they actually look at a system that decreases the willingness to pay for end-of-life drugs. So that's kind of what's happened.
Yes, yeah, that is unfortunately what has happened, because NICE did some
So it's
research.
kind of a bit of an opposite of the old model in a way.
Yes, it is definitely
And
not
that's what
we
we're
were
stuck
hoping.
with at the moment. So that's why we've got these
Yeah.
problems at the moment. So,
Yes.
and just also briefly, you know, do we actually pay too much for medicines? I think it's going to be really interesting for people to hear the issues around about, you know, increases in you know, the funding. Have there been any increases in the funding for supporting new drugs? So what does that actually mean?
So as far as I know, every year the cost of NHS funding increases year on year by about 6%. Okay.
Yeah.
But standard funding for drugs was set in 2004.
Wow.
And has remained the same and is still the same.
Wow.
Okay.
That's pretty shocking, isn't it?
So yes, and the end of life was introduced in 2009. So with the new model of the severity modifier, it's called.
Yeah.
They do have a little way to tip it up to how end of life used to be. It's just that unfortunately most metastatic breast cancer drugs do not qualify.
Don't
under the new
qualify for
formula.
that increased cost of end of life, which can be up to 50,000, but we're not getting up to that, are we?
No, it's really quite difficult for breast cancer
Yeah.
to get up to that for various reasons.
Yeah, yeah. And we've got to remember that pharma is a business and they are there for the profits, you know, and that is, you know, that's always going to be like that. It's never going to be any different. So,
Pharma
you
is a
know, but
business,
yeah,
but they do need to make a profit in order to invest in the next drug down the
yeah,
line. But they do need to have their profits
yeah.
curtailed a little bit.